My parents threw my suitcase onto the front lawn and changed the locks while a shadowy figure watched from the upstairs window of what used to be my bedroom. Neighbors were already filming everything. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just pulled out my phone and dialed one number. 15 minutes later, a man arrived. My name is Elena Brooks. The suitcase hit the dry grass with a dull thud under the relentless Arizona sun. Dust puffed up around it as my second bag followed, tumbling down the cracked adobe steps. Clothes spilled out onto the hot sand like they'd been discarded without a second thought. My parents, Martin and Valerie Brooks, stood on the porch with their arms crossed, faces tight and rehearsed, as if this moment had been planned for weeks. Behind them, in the upstairs window, my old room, a silhouette hovered behind the curtain. Watching. Waiting. Phones were already raised before I even moved. Mrs. Dalton next door. The Harrisons across the street. Even quiet Mr. Alvarez from the corner house. Everyone recording. Everyone witnessing what my parents clearly believed would be my lowest moment. But I stayed still. My fingers shook slightly as I scrolled through my contacts and stopped on a number I'd saved months ago, hoping I'd never need. I pressed call. The voice on the other end was calm. Steady. Give me 15 minutes. I sat down on my suitcase right there on the lawn and waited. Exactly 15 minutes later, a gray sedan pulled up to the curb. A man stepped out, wearing a worn suit and carrying an old leather briefcase. His skin was tanned, weathered by years under desert skies. He walked straight toward me. Elena Brooks, he asked quietly. I nodded. He didn't say anything else to me. Instead, he turned and walked directly to the front door, ringing the bell 3 sharp times. My father yanked the door open, his face flushed with heat and anger. Who the hell are you? The man handed him a thick envelope. My father's eyes moved quickly across the pages. Then slower. Then he stopped reading altogether. The color drained from his face. He glanced back at the house, then at me, as if trying to understand how the ground beneath him had shifted so suddenly. I stood up. Earlier that afternoon, I'd come home from work still wearing my office blouse, dust clinging to the hem from the drive. I'd barely stepped out of my car before my father dragged my suitcase from the hallway and shoved it down the steps. He didn't bother being careful. It bounced hard against the gravel. My mother stood beside him, her voice loud enough for the whole street to hear. This house needs to go to Claire, she announced. She's young. She's starting her life. Planning a future. You're grown, Elena. You can take care of yourself. Claire. My younger sister. The one who'd always come first. Those words hit harder than the heat rising off the pavement. I looked down at my old suitcase, a fresh scrape carved into its side. My grandmother Margaret had given it to me the day I graduated college, pressing it into my hands with a tired smile. For all the places you'll go, she'd said. A memory flashed, Claire's 18th birthday. A brand new white SUV in the driveway, ribbon tied perfectly across the hood. My parents beaming beside her. My own 18th had been a homemade cake and a reminder that I need to earn my way. Another memory followed. Claire's 21st. A fully paid European trip. Paris. London. Rome. I stayed behind, working extra shifts to cover rent, receiving nothing but a postcard that read, "Wish you were here." The sun burned overhead as the neighborhood watched in silence. Across the fence, Mrs. Dalton appeared with a folding chair and a bottle of cold water. She sat them beside me without a word. Margaret would never have allowed this, she whispered. I sat down, breathing slow, refusing to react. No begging. No yelling. That was when the man in the suit spoke clearly for everyone to hear. "My name is Daniel Price," he said calmly. "I represent the legal owner of this property." And in that moment, everything began to change. The murmurs from the neighbors grew louder as Daniel Price stepped closer to the porch. He opened his briefcase with deliberate calm and removed a neatly organized folder. The sound of papers shifting felt unnaturally loud in the heavy desert air. "Recorded deed dated 2 years ago," he began, his voice even and professional, "confirms that Margaret Brooks transferred full ownership of this residence into an irrevocable trust." My father's jaw tightened. "The sole beneficiary and trustee," Daniel continued, "is Elena Brooks." Silence fell like a dropped curtain. My mother leaned forward, squinting at the documents as if disbelief alone could undo them. "That's impossible," she said sharply. "Margaret never said anything about this." Daniel didn't look up. "All prior ownership claims held by Martin Brooks and Valerie Brooks were legally dissolved on the date of transfer." My father laughed once, short, brittle. "We've lived here for decades. This is our home." Behind them, movement echoed from inside the house. Footsteps on the stairs. Claire appeared halfway down, gripping the railing. Her face had lost its color, lips parted like she wanted to speak, but no sound came out. She didn't look at me. Not once. Daniel closed the folder slightly, still holding it open for visibility. "Under state law, the trust is irrevocable. No amendments can be made without consent from the beneficiary." He turned his head toward me briefly. "Just enough. That consent has not been given." Whispers rippled through the gathered neighbors. "I always thought that house was Margaret's," someone murmured. "She built it herself, didn't she?" another voice added. My father pointed a shaking finger. "You can't just show up and..." Daniel cut in smoothly. "The documents are recorded with the county. Copies are available upon request." He snapped the folder shut. "My client has full legal right to occupy the property immediately." My mother's posture shifted. Her voice softened, turning almost pleading as she reached a hand toward me across the invisible distance. "Elena, honey, let's not do this out here," she said. "Come inside. We can talk. We're still family." The word felt hollow. I stood slowly, aware of every eye on the street. Heat radiated off the sidewalk, blurring the edges of the world. The porch I'd crossed thousands of times suddenly felt like foreign ground. Daniel stepped aside, gesturing toward the open doorway. "After you, Miss Brooks." My father blocked the entrance for a moment longer, staring at the papers like they might rearrange themselves. My mother whispered his name urgently. Claire took a small step back, finally meeting my eyes for a fraction of a second before looking away again. I crossed the gravel toward the porch. Each step felt measured. Controlled. Daniel spoke again, his tone unchanged. "Your grandmother acted out of concern. She suspected plans were being made to sell the property to fund extended opportunities for the younger family member." My father snapped his head up. "We were just thinking about Claire's future," he said defensively. "Programs abroad. Fair distribution. That's all." My mother said nothing. She stared at the ground between us. Daniel nodded once. "Regardless of intent, the legal instruments stand." Claire stayed silent, arms crossed tight against herself. A memory surfaced suddenly, Grandma Margaret leading me into her study one quiet evening. The smell of old books and lavender soap. The small wall safe hidden behind a framed photograph. "Just in case," she'd said, pressing the combination into my memory. I hadn't understood then. I did now. Daniel adjusted his stance. The trust structure ensures the property remains protected from decisions that would favor one descendant over another. My father shook his head. She never talked to us about any of this. She didn't need to, Daniel replied calmly. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the porch. No one moved to escape the heat. The air felt charged, thick with consequences. We thought we were doing right by both girls, my father muttered. My mother finally spoke, barely above a whisper. Margaret always did things her own way. Daniel closed his notes. That concludes the ownership clarification. The finality in his voice left no room for argument. My father's shoulders sagged. My mother blinked rapidly, turning her face away. Claire leaned against the wall, breathing shallow, her confidence gone. Daniel paused, then added, one additional clause. Everyone froze. A built-in trigger activates if access is unlawfully denied to the beneficiary, he said evenly. Actions such as changing the locks without authorization automatically notify federal authorities. My father's face drained completely. Daniel continued, unflinching. An audit will now be initiated, reviewing all inheritance and gift-related filings connected to this property. My mother covered her mouth. Claire stepped forward suddenly. Her voice cracked. I heard them talking about it months ago, she confessed. About selling the house. About my program. She finally looked at me, tears spilling over. Elena, please. Give us time. I met her gaze, my voice quiet but absolute. It's too late. And in that moment, the consequences truly arrived. Claire's knees buckled as the weight of my words hit her. She sank onto the top step, sobs tearing out of her chest, raw and uncontrolled. Her hands covered her face, shoulders shaking so hard it looked painful to watch. My mother rushed to her side on instinct, pulling her into an embrace, rocking slightly as if that could undo everything that had already been set in motion. My father staggered back a step, one hand gripping the porch railing. His eyes darted between Daniel Price and the papers in his hand, then to the street where neighbors still lingered at a distance. Phones were lowered now, but no one had fully left. The humiliation hung in the air, thick and inescapable. How bad could this really get? My father asked quietly, his earlier anger gone, replaced by something close to fear. Daniel didn't speculate. That will depend entirely on the findings. That answer seemed to drain the last of my father's strength. He leaned forward, elbows braced on the railing, staring down at the concrete as if numbers were already running through his head. Penalties, back taxes, interest piling up year after year. Claire's crying intensified when she realized there would be no rescue. She gasped between sobs, trying to speak, failing every time. My mother whispered comforts into her hair, words meant to soothe but carrying no real reassurance. Her own hands trembled. One by one, the neighbors began retreating. Porch lights flicked on as dusk crept in. Front doors closed quietly. The live audience dispersed, though I knew the videos would circulate later in private messages and whispered conversations. The damage was already done. Daniel remained where he was, patient and unmoving, briefcase at his side. Time stretched. Finally, Daniel reached into his briefcase again and removed another document. He handed it to my father with practiced formality. Official notice, he said. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. Personal clothing and effects only. My father took the paper with shaking hands. My mother leaned in to read over his shoulder, her face draining of what little color remained. Claire looked up briefly, mascara streaking her cheeks, searching my face for mercy. She found none. I stepped past them without asking permission and crossed the threshold into the house. The door closed softly behind me, muting the sounds from the porch. Inside, the temperature dropped, cool adobe walls holding onto the day's earlier calm. The scent hit me immediately, dry earth, old wood, and faint traces of coffee. Grandma Margaret's coffee. My feet carried me down the hallway on their own. I didn't stop in the living room. I didn't glance at the kitchen. Those spaces belonged to memories that weren't ready to be revisited yet. I went straight to her study. The wooden floor creaked in the same places it always had. The small safe was still hidden behind a framed photograph of the house in its early years. I knelt, fingers finding the dial without hesitation. Right to her wedding year. Left to my birth year. Right again to the day she bought the land. The lock clicked open. Inside was a single cream-colored envelope with my name written in her careful, trembling script. I sat in her worn leather chair and unfolded the letter. She didn't accuse anyone directly. Instead, she wrote about moments she'd observed quietly over the years. Me folding uniforms late at night because the washer was broken. The next day, a brand new machine arriving for Claire's dorm. She wrote about evenings when I sleep in after long diner shifts, moving silently so I wouldn't wake anyone. She'd lie awake, listening to my tired footsteps, knowing I needed every extra hour to afford textbooks. She wrote about overhearing conversations in the kitchen, plans for stability, opportunity, and the future, always tilted in one direction. I could not bear to confront them in my final months, she wrote. I chose silence as my shield and law as my voice. Tears blurred the ink, but I kept reading. This home has sheltered strong women for generations, her letter ended. Now it shelters you completely. The sobs came then, quiet at first, then overwhelming. Not for what had happened outside, but for the love that had anticipated every hurt and protected me long before I knew I needed it. When the tears slowed, I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the safe. The click echoed softly. Outside, the house waited. And for the first time, it was truly mine. The house felt different once the safe was closed. Not emptier, quieter. As if it had been holding its breath for years and had finally exhaled. I stayed in Grandma Margaret's study for a long time, letting the stillness settle into my bones. The late afternoon light shifted slowly across the desk, catching dust motes that floated lazily in the air. Outside, voices rose and fell on the porch. Muffled now. Distant. They no longer belonged to me. Eventually, I stood and walked back into the hallway. Each step felt deliberate. Grounded. When I reached the front door, I paused, listening. My father's voice sounded low and strained. My mother's was quieter, uneven. Claire's sobs had softened into exhausted hiccups. I opened the door. They all turned toward me at once. My father straightened instinctively, as if bracing for another blow. My mother's eyes searched my face, swollen and red. Claire stayed seated on the top step, arms wrapped around herself like armor. Daniel Price stood slightly to the side, giving me space. This doesn't have to be like this, my mother said quickly, stepping forward. We can still talk. We can work something out as a family. Family. The word hovered between us, fragile and strained. I'm not here to negotiate, I said calmly. My father swallowed hard. You're really going to do this? I already have, I replied. Silence followed. The kind that forces truths to surface. Daniel cleared his throat. If there are no further questions, I'll take my leave. All future communication will proceed through official channels. My father didn't argue. He just nodded once, slowly, as if acknowledging something he could no longer control. Daniel turned to me. Call if you need anything. I watched him walk down the steps and disappear into his car. The gray sedan pulled away, leaving a space that felt both empty and final. My mother moved toward Claire again, holding her tightly. My father stood apart, rubbing the back of his neck, eyes unfocused. 30 days, he muttered. That's all. That's the notice, I confirmed. His shoulders sagged. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching across the yard. The heat began to ease, replaced by the faintest hint of evening cool. Neighbors were gone now. Curtains drawn. Windows dark. This was no longer a public spectacle. My mother finally looked at me again. Where are we supposed to go? I didn't answer immediately. Not because I didn't know, but because the answer wasn't mine to solve. You'll figure it out, I said. Claire lifted her head, eyes red and swollen. I didn't mean for it to happen like this, she whispered. I believed her. And it still didn't change anything. Intentions hadn't erased years of imbalance. Silence hadn't protected me then. It wouldn't undo the consequences now. I hope you do figure things out, I said quietly. But this house isn't part of that anymore. The wind picked up slightly, carrying fine sand across the steps. No one brushed it away. My father nodded once, stiffly. We'll start packing. I stepped back inside, closing the door behind me without slamming it. The sound was soft, but decisive. That night, I slept in my old room for the first time in years. The one that had been locked earlier that day. Moonlight filtered through the window, casting familiar shapes across the walls. It felt strange, but not wrong. Morning came quietly. Over the next few weeks, the house shifted again. Boxes appeared in the hallway, my parents' things this time. Voices stayed low. Movements careful. There were no more arguments. Just logistics. The audit arrived faster than expected. Letters. Phone calls. Meetings. I overheard fragments through closed doors. Numbers spoken in hushed tones. The sale of the vacation cabin near Santa Fe. Savings draining away faster than they'd imagined. Claire stopped talking about traveling altogether. On the final day, my parents loaded the last of their belongings into a rented truck. My mother lingered at the doorway, touching the frame like she was memorizing it. This place was supposed to hold us together, she said softly. It still does, I replied. Just not the way you planned. She nodded, eyes shining, then stepped away. The truck pulled off down the street, disappearing around the corner. Just like that, the house was silent again. I changed the locks that afternoon. Front door. Back gate. Every entry point. The sound of each click felt grounding. Protective. That evening, I sat on the porch with a mug of coffee, watching the sunset behind the desert hills. The air cooled quickly, carrying the scent of dust and sage. For the first time, there was no knot in my chest. No waiting for the next demand. No bracing for disappointment. Just space. And quiet. And a house that finally belonged to me. The first real change didn't come with noise. It came with routine. I started waking up early again, just like I used to before everything became complicated. The house felt lighter in the mornings. Sunlight filled the kitchen without tension clinging to the walls. I brewed coffee, sat at the table, and plan my days without factoring in anyone else's expectations. That freedom still felt unfamiliar, but I was learning. One afternoon, a week after my parents moved out, a letter arrived. No return address. I recognized my mother's handwriting immediately. I didn't open it right away. I placed it on the counter and went about my day, answering emails, reviewing paperwork, finalizing the last steps of the property audit. When evening came and the house grew quiet again, I finally sat down and opened the envelope. I never meant to make you feel invisible. The words were careful. Measured. Full of regret, but not apology. She wrote about fear. About how they leaned on Claire because she needed more help. About how they assumed I was strong enough to manage on my own. How strength, in their minds, had meant doesn't need anything. I folded the letter and set it aside. Understanding didn't erase impact. A few days later, Daniel Price stopped by with updates. The audit had uncovered more than expected. Misused funds. Questionable transfers. Nothing illegal enough for court, but enough to ensure my parents wouldn't regain financial control anytime soon. They're downsizing, Daniel said. Significantly. I nodded. That's probably for the best. He studied me for a moment. You're handling this well. I'm just done carrying what isn't mine, I replied. That same week, I met someone unexpected at a small cafe downtown. Her name was Lina Morales. She was an interior designer, recently relocated, working on restoring older homes in the area. We started talking over a shared table during a busy afternoon. She asked about the house. I told her the truth, carefully. She didn't pry. She didn't judge. She just listened. That place sounds like it has good bones, she said with a smile. Sometimes houses just need to breathe again. So did people. Over the next few weeks, Lina helped me reimagine the space, not to erase the past, but to stop living inside it. Heavy curtains were replaced with lighter ones. Old furniture was donated or refinished. Walls were repainted in warm, neutral tones. The locked rooms opened up one by one. Each change felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Then came the call from Claire. I almost didn't answer. But I did. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. I just wanted you to know. I'm moving. Where? I asked. With a friend. Out of state. I need to figure out who I am without all of this. I let that sink in. I hope you do, I said honestly. There was a pause. I never meant to take what was yours. I know, I replied. But knowing doesn't undo it. I understand, she whispered. When the call ended, I felt no anger. No relief. Just closure. Months passed. The house became a place people wanted to visit. Friends stopped by. Laughter returned, real laughter. The kind that doesn't feel forced or performative. One evening, Lina and I sat on the porch, watching the sky turn shades of amber and purple. You've changed, she said gently. I had to, I replied. Staying the same was costing me too much. She smiled. I'm glad you chose yourself. So was I. On the anniversary of my grandmother's passing, I visited her grave alone. I placed fresh flowers and stood quietly, the desert wind brushing past me. I finally listened, I said softly. Thank you. As I walked away, I realized something important. This wasn't a story about inheritance. It was a story about permission. Permission to stop being the reliable one. Permission to set boundaries. Permission to build a life that didn't revolve around fixing everyone else. The house was never the reward. Freedom was. The invitation arrived on a Thursday morning, slipped quietly through the mail slot like it wasn't carrying years of weight. It was from my parents. No flowery envelope. No dramatic language. Just a simple card with a date, a time, and a location, a small community hall on the edge of town. A family meeting, it read. I stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Silence had brought peace. Distance had brought clarity. But another part, the part that had learned to stand steady instead of running, knew I could face this now. On my terms. The hall smelled faintly of coffee and old wood. Folding chairs were arranged in a loose circle. My parents were already there when I arrived. So was Claire. They all looked different. Not just older, realer. My father's posture had softened. My mother's eyes carried less certainty, more humility. Claire stood when she saw me, then hesitated, unsure. I took an empty chair. No one spoke at first. Finally, my father cleared his throat. We asked you here because we owe you honesty. I waited. We failed you, my mother said quietly. Not once. Not by accident. Over years. The words landed heavier than anger ever had. They talked about fear, how losing control had terrified them. How they leaned into old patterns because they were familiar. How they mistook compliance for harmony. We taught you that love was conditional, my father said, voice breaking. And that's on us. I didn't interrupt. I didn't rescue them from discomfort. Claire spoke next. I grew up thinking the world would adjust to me. You were always the one adjusting instead. Her eyes filled. I'm sorry. The room felt thick with things finally said out loud. I'm not here for apologies, I said calmly. I'm here for clarity. They nodded. We don't want anything from you, my mother said. No money. No house. No favors. My father slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents. A formal acknowledgement. A written statement relinquishing any future claim, financial or otherwise. Clear. Legal. Final. We are rebuilding, he said. Separately. Quietly. I closed the folder. This doesn't fix the past, I said. But it does protect the future. I stood to leave. My mother reached out, then stopped herself. Can we start again? I met her eyes. We can start differently, I said. Slow. Honest. With boundaries. She nodded, tears falling freely now. That night, I slept deeply. Days later, the house buzzed with preparation. Lena and I were hosting a small gathering, nothing fancy. Just friends, music, warmth. As the evening unfolded, laughter spilled into the garden. Someone lit candles. Someone else turned on music. The house felt alive, not haunted. Lena caught my hand. You did this, she said. No, I replied. I allowed it. Later, standing alone near the old oak tree in the yard, I thought about the girl I used to be. The one who stayed quiet to keep peace. The one who equated usefulness with worth. She deserved better. So did I. A week later, I received a final message from my parents. A simple one. We are proud of you. I didn't cry. Because pride no longer defined me. I looked around the house, my house, and felt something solid settle in my chest. Belonging. Not borrowed. Not conditional. Earned by choosing myself. The past had tried to claim me. But the future was already mine. The morning sun spilled through the windows like it belonged there. I stood barefoot in the kitchen, coffee in hand, listening to the soft hum of the house waking up. The refrigerator clicked. The floorboards creaked gently beneath my feet. These sounds used to make me anxious, signals that someone might need something from me. Now, they just felt like home. Lena joined me a moment later, tying her hair back, still half asleep. She smiled without saying anything and leaned against the counter. There was no urgency between us. No pressure to perform or prove. Peace had its own rhythm. That afternoon, I opened the final box in the storage room. Inside were old photographs, family gatherings, birthdays, moments frozen in time. In most of them, I stood slightly apart, smiling politely, always composed. I didn't feel bitterness looking at them. Just distance. I kept a few. The rest I placed back carefully and sealed the box again. Not everything deserved to be carried forward. A few weeks later, my parents visited for the first time since the meeting. They didn't come inside immediately. They waited on the porch, unsure. Respectful. That mattered. We talked over tea. Simple conversation. No history lessons. No guilt-tripping. When the visit ended, they left without asking for anything more. That mattered too. Claire sent a postcard from the coast. She started a new job. She sounded uncertain, but hopeful. For the first time, her uncertainty wasn't mine to manage. I pinned the card on the fridge and went on with my day. The house continued to evolve. The guest room became a studio space. The dining room filled with plants. The old study, once a place of secrets, turned into a reading nook flooded with light. Every change was intentional. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Lena and I sat under the oak tree again. She reached for my hand. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked gently. I thought about the question. About the fear. The guilt. The moment I chose myself. "No," I said. "I regret waiting so long." She smiled. "You didn't wait. You grew." Later that night, alone in bed, I reflected on the truth I'd been avoiding for years. Love that demands silence isn't love. Support that only flows one way isn't support. And family that thrives on sacrifice without gratitude is not a home. I had mistaken endurance for loyalty. But loyalty, to myself, was what finally set me free. On the anniversary of moving my parents out, I hosted a dinner. Friends filled the house with warmth and noise. Laughter echoed down the hallways. Someone spilled wine. Someone else danced badly in the living room. I watched it all from the doorway, heart full. This was what choosing myself had built. Not isolation. Not bitterness. But space, for real connection. Before bed, I walked through the house, turning off lights. When I reached the front door, I paused. For years, that door had symbolized obligation. Responsibility. Weight. Now, it symbolized choice. I locked it, not to keep people out, but to protect what was inside. And for the first time in my life, that included me.